I'm talking about building a multi-million-dollar, water reservoir. I'm talking about not being dead last in electricity reliability in the country of the lower 48 states. I'm talking about real investments. If you look at the polling, for instance, on a proposition this November to put about $1.4 billion in transportation funding, the highest percentage, the highest demographic that supports that expenditure are Latinos across the state of Texas. And so I think if they understand what it means, if they understand that your appraisal goes up for your property taxes, it's because the state is pushing those expenses down to local governments, then they realize, well, maybe we should expand the sales tax. Maybe we should have a gasoline tax on Herb Kelleher's corporate, commercial jets at Southwest Airlines. They have to understand the outcome. And so you don't spend that sort of time in retail politics when you're running primaries. You're not really talking about that. And so I think it's a two-way street. We have to be willing to have the conversation, and they have to be willing to listen and understand, what the ramification is.
The one thing I would add is the progressive community tends to like to say that people are voting against their interest. It's not true. People are voting for the interests that they prioritize. So we have to figure out why they prioritize those interests above the ones we think they should prioritize. But as long as our politics are grounded in the sense of that we know what you should care about, we're not going to get where we need to be. I look at Mississippi last night. I'm from Mississippi, and I know a lot of black people who voted for Thad Cochran, and there are a lot of angry other black people who don't live in Mississippi who are like, how could you possibly vote for him? Why didn't you? We should have stayed out and let Travis Childers win. But for those African Americans, what they saw was that Thad Cochran talked to them. He actually took some time, spent some money, but more importantly, Thad Cochran voted for Katrina relief money. He helped keep Ingalls, which employs a vast portion of the population. He did stuff for them, and because he did it, they're like, well, if you're going to bother to ask me to vote, my interest today is not having some crazy man who said that he believes that we should send back $1.5 billion of education money. I don't know that a Democrat can win in the fall, but I know that this crazy man can't go today. And so we have to realign how we think about interest so that our policies and our conversation and our retail politics and our relationship politics reflect the people we're talking to. And as Julie said, people don't live in silos. And we have to understand where they were visiting yesterday and where they're going to be tomorrow and follow them so we can make sure we understand all the things they need so that we become the answer to what they want.
Steve?
I had two questions. One question for the Texans is, how potent do you think the threat is of Republicans making inroads in the Latino community? Looking at Ted Cruz, looking at George P. Bush, how real do you think that is, and what would we have to do to combat that on the Democratic side? And then, Stacey, one of you could talk about the Green Tea Coalition, if you think that there's larger implications for that kind of work.
Well, I think Republicans do a good job as they find, their Hispanic candidate and they really amplify that person. The issue with Democrats is there's so many. The farm team is so large. I mean, you can't just single one person out. But like Ted Cruz has said, he's not the Hispanic candidate. I mean, he has said that. George P. Bush, you don't see him. He's in the Me Too category when it comes to rejecting ACA and not stepping out. I mean, maybe on immigration he will say things to his party. But quite frankly, you saw the best of the Republican Hispanic elected class try to get just some harmless language into the Republican Party platform in Fort Worth a few weeks ago, and they couldn't even do that. And so I don't think if you can, you can't represent a party that says, you only speak English in this state and come back and say we are the candidate for your future in Texas. So I don't buy into it too much, but I do recognize that there is a lot of press attention on the anomalies in the party, and so I think we just have to take it for what it is.
Yeah, we did polling last year in Texas where we asked people on Latino registered voters, and we asked them, did you vote for Ted Cruz for U.S. Senate? And we got the right numbers saying yes, we did, and all matched up. And then we said, okay, well, why did that happen? We asked them a follow-up question, what party does Ted Cruz belong to? And most of the people who voted for him thought that he was a Republican. And so I think that to your question about do we have to worry about Republicans winning over Latinos? Yes, not because Republicans offer ideas and a vision of what Latino voters are looking for, but because nobody is talking to Latino voters right now and giving them information about what they stand for and what they represent, neither Republicans nor Democrats. And so when we allow there to be silence and very little messaging done to entire pockets, I mean, if you think about it, Texas has not been a battleground state in the presidential since I don't even remember when now. And so there are no television ads played in Texas for Obama, right? So you don't have that Obama lift helping anybody down ballot in Texas. So that's already one dynamic that's a problem. But you're not putting out a general election message because, as Trey said, it's already all happened in the primary in Texas. Everything's so gerrymandered that there's very few places where there's an actual race happening in November in Texas anymore. And when you've got this big vacuum of information, a Ted Cruz can easily step in because we as Democrats and as progressives aren't bothering to point out all of the reasons why Ted Cruz is dangerous for working people in Texas, people of goodwill in Texas, much less Mexican-American people living in Texas. And so I think that's what allows, confusion and, just a real lack of information going into the ballot booth, right? And so I think, yes, but it's not a problem that is insurmountable because by doing our basic work of reaching out and talking with and making those connections, we can easily get past that.
I mean, just to emphasize that, I mean, if Ted Cruz really was the Latino community's candidate in the Republican Party, he'd run by his real name, which is Rafael, and not Ted, right? And so that's number one. And Julie was talking, I was like, man, I should have said that. But other two, I mean, you look at Victor Carrillo in the Railroad Commission, you look at Xavier Rodriguez, who was a Texas Supreme Court justice. I mean, Xavier lost his race, and by the way, Xavier spells his name with an X. It's like Javier, it's like, militant, and so the guy that beat him spent like $10,000 in his Republican primary. His last name was Smith, and beat him. And so, I think on the one hand, it's a very, very, sword and shield sort of proposition. And I think, minority candidates on the Republican side, they know that.
Just you're on Georgia.
So the Green Tea Coalition is a very strange anomaly in Georgia. They are a combination of the Tea Party, Environmental Coalition, and the NAACP. But we're desperate down there. But what happened, it started actually in 2011. We brought together the Tea Party and the Southern Baptist Convention with the Democratic Caucus to stop the fair tax, which almost passed in Georgia, until we were able to point out that to pay for a $150 million tax cut for the wealthy, 82% of Georgians would have to pay more in taxes. And once I was able to give those numbers to the Tea Party, they realized we may be for the fair tax, but it's not fair to us, and they stood with us, and we were able to kill the bill. The following year, there was a tax proposal on transportation, and this is really where the Green Tea Coalition came together most acutely. They were opposed. It was a 1 cent tax that would be for transportation, but through the process, they eliminated transit opportunities. The roads that were going to be built weren't going into communities of color, and everyone was unhappy. And so the Tea Party opposed it because it was a tax. The environmental community opposed it because there was no transit, and the African American community opposed it because it didn't actually help any of our communities. And so together, they actually defeated the tax in most of the places it was up. They again came together last year. The other really interesting one at the Capitol was there was a push by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce to outlaw picketing on public, basically to outlaw picketing in public places right after the, I just blanked on the name, Occupy movement. They attempted to do this, and when labor opposed it, they were really trying to hit labor. Well, we talked about it, and I was like, well, you should go explain to the Tea Party that if it's a ban on picketing, that means a ban on their picketing too. And suddenly the Tea Party and labor came together with young Democrats and the environmental groups and filled the rafters at the Capitol and stopped that bill on the last day as well. The last one, and I think the most terrifying one for the chamber, was that this past year, the coalition of the Green Tea Coalition came together and pushed for solar power in front of the Public Service Commission. So the Tea Party was the tip of the spear to get the environmental issue of solar power done in Georgia. And they did it again in combination. For the African American community, it was about cost. For the environmental community, it was about access and expanding green energy. And for the Tea Party, it was about monopoly. They didn't want the electric companies to have a monopoly on energy provision. But what we've been able to build, and no one is confused about what we believe. No one is, I don't believe that the Tea Party woke up and decided they agree with me on things. The Tea Party and the NAACP are not going home and breaking bread every day. But what we realize is that there are common goals that we have. Our values that drive us to those goals may be different, but the need to work together is essential because they don't have enough. The Tea Party doesn't control the Republican Party. We don't have enough folks on our own to win, but when we work together, we've been able to stop some very bad legislation to move some really progressive pieces forward, as long as we just don't call it progressive when we're talking to each other. But overall, it's building those coalitions that cut across, again, those silos, because there are moments where you meet people where they are. And for me, it's not about conversion. It is about convincing you that doing what I need you to do today will get us all what we need for tomorrow.
Excellent. Yes. Yeah. So we're just about to wrap up. I wanted to give our panelists an opportunity to give the audience just quick, if they leave this room today as political consultants and people as insiders in the political realm, and they could do one thing, what advice would you give them?
No, you go first.
I don't know, I'd say we need someone like Stacey in Texas. I mean,
His name is Trey.
I don't know, that's such a loaded question. I think that, again, I mean, this is a tremendous challenge, but it's a wonderful opportunity. And so I think that, again, for the donors and the strategists and the folks who engage, I think they need to ask some very concrete, specific, and hard questions when you want to come to Texas. I mean, it's now getting kind of cool to be there because the state is changing. But frankly, if we continue to do the same things, I think it's, the minority community needs to start throwing a few elbows and letting folks know, like, okay, wait a minute. We've done that play before. We've done that a decade ago. This is a new decade. It's a new time. It's a new engagement. Let's engage with, like Julie said, you got to dance with those who bring you. But sometimes you have to change the music. And so I think it's time to change the music a little bit and keep the dance going, but let's just change the music.
The biggest piece is, if you want different thinking, you have to have different people doing the thinking. You need more people of color as the strategists, more people of color as the donors, more people of color as the operatives. If you look at state campaigns and Senate campaigns, finding people who look like the communities we want to talk to, who aren't just hired to be field workers, and being from Mississippi, being called a field worker has some loaded meaning to it. But we need people of color at every level of that decision making, because the decisions are not going to change until the people who understand how those communities think and act and behave are hired to make those choices. But that also doesn't happen simply by complaining. We have to be training them. We have to be hiring them. They can't all be volunteers. They can't just be interns. We have to vest them with power, vest them with authority, and also give them the skills that help them go to all the other places to get this work done. We are trying our best in Georgia to build that coalition, for those of you who are old enough to understand this, my team is known as the United Colors of Benetton. And thank you, the 4 people who are over 40. But I'm very intentional. We have, my core team there's a Latino, a Korean, a white guy who's our token, African American, and a Palestinian. I mean, we've covered pretty much the waterfront. I don't have anyone Native American yet. But the point is, we have to, if we want to see this change, we have to be intentional about reflecting the change before it gets to the grassroots, because the grassroots will never believe it if they don't see it. And if we don't believe it, then they're not going to believe it either.
When we start to own our own power and actually make sure our voices are heard within our own state parties, within our own local communities, and at the national level, that we're going to see some change. And I think it is about, at some point, in a nice way, throwing an elbow, but making sure that our voices are heard and that we are in the room to even get our voices heard in the first place.